Hey, podcast fans, we've got big news. Tickets and tables for the 2025 Access Connects Leadership Forum are officially on sale.
That's right. On November 25th in Calgary, we're bringing together leaders from across industries for a full day of conversation, connection, and change.
You'll hear from world-class speakers and have the opportunity to join panels and fireside chats on the issues shaping leadership today. From navigating politics and gender equity to building inclusive workplaces and driving innovation in a changing economy.
The forum is more than just a conference. It's a chance to connect with peers, meet new allies, and walk away with insights you can apply immediately to your organization.
Tickets are limited and tables are selling fast.
Head to accessconnects.com to grab your tickets or reserve a table. And don't wait too long. This event sells out every year.
Join us November 25th. Be part of the conversation and be part of the change. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Quiet Part Out Loud. I'm Alex.
And I'm Nuvyn.
And we're here today with Julie Savard-Shaw, who is the Executive Director of the Prosperity Project. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a fun episode because we have been working together for a few months now. So some of our audience might already know you or have heard of you or you've met in person because we've had some events. So can you start off by introducing yourself and your work with the TPP?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Prosperity Project. We are a registered charity that is quite young. We were founded in 2020 by a group of 62 senior executive women that came together during the pandemic because they were afraid of the impact that the pandemic would have on women's careers. Since then, we've sort of moved on from scrappy startup, volunteer-led, to a full, registered charity with staff and myself. What we focus on is very aligned with what the initial intent was. We both identify and work to remove the barriers that stand in the way of women's economic success. We do that through research, which is what we'll talk about today and what we've worked on together. But we also do mentorship and sort of bringing people together in roundtables across the country through a Government of Canada funded program. So in a nutshell, that's who we are and what I do.
So before becoming the Executive Director of Prosperity Project, you built a career across policy, advocacy, and leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what experiences most shaped how you approach your work today?
Yes, I've definitely had an interesting career, I would say. So I started my career actually in international development. That's what my education is in. But it was in advocacy and policy. So what I did was I would be developing policy recommendations for the federal government on what they should invest in or not, and then of course doing direct advocacy. From there, I realized that I didn't want to be on the outside of government. I wanted to be in the inside to affect change directly. So I joined the federal, in politics. So I wasn't public servant. I was a political staff. And we were in opposition at the time. And then, of course, Justin Trudeau won in 2015. So I was in his office as an advisor to the Prime Minister, covering files ranging from international affairs, international development, everything related to gender and immigration. Spent a couple years doing advocacy for two other organizations. One of them was Women Deliver, and the other one was the Canadian Teachers Federation. So gained and developed those like lobbying and advocacy skill and campaign development. Went back into government for 2 other years with the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, and then with the Minister of Public Safety. But at that time, I had a young child. And, we talk about the need for flexibility, and, care responsibilities. Like when you are in politics, it is extremely difficult to have boundaries and flexibility. I still remember I was sleeping one morning, a rare morning that I wasn't up at like 5 a.m. And my son brought me my 3 phones and he was like, Mama, the minister is calling. And he was right. Like the minister was calling and it was like 7 a.m. And I was just like, oh my God, he's 3 years old and he knows who the minister is. Like that, I can't. And so I left shortly thereafter and joined the Prosperity Project about 6 months after that. But I would say like my whole career has really focused on bringing that gender lens, whether it was at the Prime Minister's office or even at public safety, making sure that all of the programs and policies that we developed, I'm not going to say that our policies and programs always benefited women, but at least that we knew when they were not benefiting them and that we were okay with that. Because I think often what happens is people just don't take the time to think about the unintended impacts and they go ahead with something. And then in retrospect, they're like, oh, shoot, we should have seen that. And it's like, well, yeah, you should have.
Yeah. So did that role exist in the federal government now? I'm so curious because I know there's a lot of conversation around wage funding and what's going to happen there with the budget. And so I'm wondering if it's just like that role doesn't exist.
It doesn't.
Or no, it doesn't.
Yeah, like that's like one thing. And, my former colleagues that are currently at PMO may be listening and not too happy with me. But I genuinely think that they don't have someone at the Prime Minister's office right now whose responsibility is to think about the gender lens of the policies. And I understand that Prime Minister Carney is trying to differentiate himself from Prime Minister Trudeau. But it's not about being woke or it's not about being like, too leftist. It's recognizing that women are 50% of Canada's population. And if you don't apply that lens, you may be at times negatively impacting 50% of your population. So,
or 100% of your population.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. And so it should never be an afterthought, but it is currently.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. And I was wondering that. It's too bad because that funding, there's a lot of organizations that depend on that wage funding and
yeah, we're one of them.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Julie. So what in your career, in everything that you've done, what has been your biggest leadership lesson? And what is still hard for you?
So this podcast is called The Quiet Part Out Loud, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say the quiet part out loud. And I would say that my biggest lesson is that not everyone is going to like you. And that as a woman, I'm held to a different leadership standard than other people, than men, usually. And that the expectation for women is that we morph ourselves into these 5 billion different versions of ourselves to please everyone. And that has been really, that's been the biggest leadership lesson because it's simply not sustainable. And, we've talked throughout this podcast about, well, how do we increase representation of women in positions of leadership? And I think part of the problem and part of the solution is how we treat and what we expect of women as leaders. And I mean, I could talk for so long about all this, but that's been the biggest lesson and challenge, I would say, because I guess I've learned that I'm a people pleaser as well. And what's still hard, I would say, is letting balls drop and being okay with it. As a high achieving woman, I've been taught from a young age that like failure is not an option. And so I've grown used to figuring out everything, making sure that everything gets done, making sure that everything gets done properly. But as a leader, you can't do it all. And it's about learning how to distinguish between like the glass balls and the rubber balls so that your team, when it is a rubber ball and it drops, your team has the opportunity to learn from it. But that's so hard as a perfectionist person to be like, yes, I know this ball is going to drop. I see it. But that's okay.
Letting it fall.
Yes.
Happening.
Yeah, so that's still hard. I'm still working on it. But that, again, that's part of like, if we want women to raise their hands to go up the leadership ladder or to accept the positions of leadership, like, no, we're not born leaders. It's something that you learn. And so like making sure that women, I mean, all leaders have the right supports and systems and advice in place. Like I'm so grateful that I have a leadership coach who's helping me through this, but not everyone has that opportunity. So yeah. That's what I would say are my lessons and what's still hard.
That's a great answer. And honestly, I think, there's been research done that expectations of women leaders or women in leadership are that number one, we're likable. And that's not a requirement of men. You don't have to be likable. And I think a lot of male leaders know inherently that not everyone's going to like me. I'm just going to make the best decision that I know how, and I'm going to lead the team however I'm going to do it, right? But women are expected to first and foremost be likable. And I've experienced the same thing as you, is that I am not for everybody, and not everybody loves how I operate or how I present myself. And I think that our likability is then transferred into the way that we execute our work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like I get often that I'm too harsh, and I'm like, no, I'm not harsh, I'm direct. And
Yes.
and at the beginning I took that personally and being like, oh my god, I'm so harsh, I need to tone it down. But it's actually not on me to manage your emotions about my directness, and that's what I'm learning, right?
And I think knowing that and acknowledging it too comes with, I'm going to say, age. Like it's a self-awareness thing, right? You have to learn that not everyone's going to like you. And you have to learn that, no, I don't want to pretend I'm somebody else. Because I think we've all gone through that sort of shape shifting where you're like, okay, I can be bubbly. I can do it. But
Yeah.
I can't.
Oh my god, I totally agree. I'm so not a bubbly, like, when they're like, oh, you've got to motivate your team for the event. And I'm like, yeah, totally. And I'm like, okay, Caroline, can you do that? And it's recognizing that she's awesome at it and I'm not, right? Like, and that's okay. But it's hard to accept that.
You alluded to the work we've done together, which was some research, and the report is called the Annual Report Card. So Axis supported the Prosperity Project in the Annual Report Card for 2025. And ARC has become a really critical snapshot of where Canada stands on gender equity and leadership. And for those who may not have followed our events closely, can you walk us through this year's results and what stood out most to you?
Sure. So this year's, so we call it ARC, the Annual Report Card. This year's ARC was actually a look at the last 5 years. So previously, it's a snapshot at what happens every year. So for the first time this year, we did a longitudinal study of the last 5 years. And what really stood out, I would say, are two things. One is that there was a drop in the representation of women at the pipeline to leadership level. And the second major sort of data worth noting is not one data per se, but it's, I would say, many pieces of data, is that white women are still the one that are mostly represented in positions of leadership, and that women from underrepresented group are still mostly absent.
I'm so curious if we just dive into this data, because one of the things that we love to do on the podcast is really delve deep into the data and then kind of take a step back and go like, okay, like, so what? Like, what does this tell us? What could we be doing differently? I love the fact that you work with corporations and large organizations throughout the country to really kind of dig into their pipeline of talent, retention strategies. What does the data tell us about the projection and trajectory of women in leadership? And it's concerning to see that decline in that talent pipeline. And so when you work with corporations, what do they say about this? Like, to what do they attribute those results?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's a problem that's across all sectors. Like it's not a problem just for one sector. And the reality is that no one really knows, because I think if we knew specifically what was causing that decline, we would be able to address it, develop policies or programs or the support that's needed. The reality is, I think it's an amalgamation of many different factors. So those include, I think lack of support for women in terms of the care responsibilities that they have. A lot of women that are in that pipeline to leadership are what we call women that are in the squeeze generation. So they're both caring for their children and starting to care for their elderly parents. There is still a lot of bias, unfortunately, in terms of performance evaluation bias, retention bias, in that certain women, based on the department that you're in, may not be getting the experience that's necessary to go up the leadership ladder, right? I'm talking here about more operational experience, because ultimately, like, to be a CEO, you have to have that operational experience. You can't just have been your whole career in like the comms department. And so making sure that women are being given those sort of opportunities to expand their skills, that's not happening as much as we would like. And then finally, I would say the return to the office is a big one as well. I think it's going to happen. It's happening right now, but companies need to be more deliberate in how they are rolling out that return to the office. And that's not what we're seeing right now.
It's more of a mandate.
Yeah. And it's ad hoc. Like they're saying, you have to be in the office 3 days a week, but they're not coordinating what days a certain team needs to be in. So someone will go in, but the rest of their team is not there and they're virtual. So you end up being on Zoom in the office, which defeats the purpose of going to the office.
Yeah, that's a good point. That, one takeaway might be that corporations ought to roll out return to work initiatives in a way that actually makes sense for when is your team in the office. Because if you're in the office and your colleagues are at home on Zoom because they're 3 days in, doesn't align with yours, it can be frustrating.
Exactly. And the return to the office, I agree with. We know for a fact that people that see each other, you're building the team, you're building your relationship better. It's also an opportunity for women to network and develop those relationships that will enable them to go up the leadership ladder, right? Like, we know for a fact that all of those conversations and those relationships that enable you to have your name put up when there is a new position that's available, like, that's not done through Zoom calls. It's done when you're building that relationship in person. So we absolutely agree that a return to the office is beneficial. It just needs to be thoughtful and done in a way that recognizes that women specifically do have different challenges and responsibilities. So it's also about being flexible in that return to the office mandate.
Right. Yeah. And an element of trust as well with teams. And that's built often in person and over time. And if you don't have that experience, then it's challenging.
Absolutely.
So, Julie, the arc suggests that we have stalled out, as you said, we've stalled out after early gains. The pipeline to leadership is starting to go down. Do you think that organizations have hit equity fatigue? And are leaders starting to believe that they've kind of done enough from a diversity, inclusion, equity perspective?
That's a great question. I don't think that it's equity fatigue per se. I think that the shift is more about belonging and making people feel included. So it's walking away from terminology like equity or diversity, equity, and inclusion that has, I think, in and of itself, excluded people. And I think that's part of that backlash, right? People feel excluded from that narrative, whereas it's difficult to disagree with feeling like you belong or feeling like you're included in an organization or its culture. And so I think organizations like Axis and TPP are going to have to adapt to that and frame what we do a little bit differently. But my hope, or maybe I'm being optimistic, is that companies aren't moving away per se. They are changing how it's being carried out and changing the approach. So I'll give you an example. One of our partners has been a huge champion of DEI, and their focus now is going to be more on that belonging and looking not at quotas or like achieving certain numbers of like X number of women, X number of Black people, rather on like teaching their managers and their HR people about transferable skills. And because ultimately that often impacts the underrepresented groups and women. But it's because there's no understanding that like what you learned, for example, in comms, like those skills are absolutely transferable to, say, public affairs. But if you're not taught to look at those transferable skills or understand them, you end up siloing people. And that's when oftentimes whether it's like by department or by level of your career, that's where it's like stifling progression, right? Like, let's say I'm an executive director at the Prosperity Project. In a massive company, executive director could be quite junior. But the reality is I would be higher in the leadership ladder. But if you're an HR or a recruiter and you don't necessarily understand those differences, then they would be putting me at a level that I shouldn't be at because they don't necessarily recognize those transferable skills. So I think
you're kind of suggesting that women and other sort of marginalized groups are being typecast into specific roles.
And levels.
And they're not being and levels and not being challenged to kind of pivot or use their skills in other ways.
Absolutely. And not given the opportunities, I don't think either, in the same way that men are being given those opportunities.
So, Julie, one of the strengths of the arc is its focus on intersectionality and women of color, Indigenous women, women with disabilities. How are those layers of data shaping the story, and what should organizations be paying more attention to?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think one of the benefits of participating in the ARC and one of the strengths of the ARC is that we don't just look at men and women at those 4 levels of leadership, but we do dig down into those intersectionality, because the reality is that a Black woman or an Indigenous woman does not have the same access or the same she has different challenges. And, we're 3 white women on this panel. Our barriers are very different than the barriers that they face. And so I think it's important for companies to realize that even if, let's say, they've reached 40% representation of women in their company, are those 40% women all white women? Because that tells a very different story of who they are prioritizing than if that 40% has a good representation of women from a number of different groups. And that's where companies, to be honest, are not doing so well. Their representation of overall women is not so bad in many cases, but their representation of Black women, especially Indigenous women, women with disabilities, and 2S LGBTQ women. One group that is doing better is women of color, but it's still something that in this socio-political environment, I think companies need to continue being actively trying to recruit and retain women of color.
And in your experience or observation, is there anything that is really working or any best practices that you've seen? I know there's a lot of, these mandates or quotas or kind of check the box type activities, but what have you seen is working in that area?
I wish I could tell you, honestly, that's actually part of our Government of Canada funded program. We're doing roundtables across the country where we are bringing groups that represent those women to speak truth to power a little bit, because I don't know that companies, or frankly, the sector, like ourselves, have really developed or proposed policies or programs that are working. And the reality is, I also don't think we've asked them, what do you need? And so I don't have a clear answer. One thing I will mention, though, is that at the Prosperity Project, we offer mentorship programs. And we're often told by companies, oh, well, we have our own internal mentorship programs. Our employees don't need it. Well, in fact, women of color and Black women especially don't feel comfortable participating in internal mentorship programs because they're afraid of the repercussion or the judgment that their mentors, who are in the end, they're seniors in that same company, the impact that would have on their career. So external mentorship program is actually one of the recommendations that we often offer to companies as a way to develop the skills and retain those women that they already have.
I think that's a great point, that external mentorship also provides someone with a very different perspective. And I think generationally, there's been a shift from, our parents who kind of either climbed the corporate ladder or stayed at a company for their entire lives because they were working for that pension. Now we see this corporate lattice where people are moving to different organizations, different roles, staying for a few years. And it's more of that corporate lattice that perhaps isn't as vertical. And I think that's challenging to navigate without external support. At Access, we often talk about the importance of building your own kind of board of directors, where you're seeking advice and perspective from multiple people within your network, and ensuring that you're surrounding yourself with people whose insight and perspective you value.
But now that you say that, I wonder if that's also part of why companies don't want that external mentorship, because they're probably ooh, the mentor may be offering that person a job or telling that person, get out of there. Your company is not great. I've never thought about
that. We at Access, we have heard that networking, I think from the maybe that's their quiet part, not so quiet or kept quiet out loud, is the concern that all of these networking opportunities are just, recruitment opportunities to go somewhere else. But then it's incumbent upon an organization to focus on retention, right? And so if talent is fleeting, and if COVID has opened up a world of virtual and hybrid employment across various sectors, how are you as an organization retaining your top talent? And maybe not enough focus is on retention and recognizing that top talent is fleeting. And if people don't feel valued, regardless of the gender, they will go somewhere else.
Yeah, and is that even, I mean, I'm always curious, do they really care about the top talent? Because I mean, this is happening in Calgary. I don't know if it's happening in Ottawa, but there are so many layoffs happening right now. There are people just being laid off, and it's the long-time loyal sort of legacy employees that are getting these packages, I have noticed anyways. And so I'm so curious. I know those employees can get very expensive, but they're also the ones that are the producers. So I'm so curious, like, do we even care about top talent anymore?
Is that as a result of like cuts, like to their budgets, or is it like what is it push? Like, yeah, what's the impetus behind this?
It's a good question. I know that in Calgary, Sport Check, Canadian Tire has done a lot of layoffs across all of their brands. So Mark's Work Warehouse, Sport Check. We just heard this week Imperial will be laying off 900 people, and so I don't know what the trigger is because those are two very different industries, two very different companies, and it really is kind of happening right now, sort of in the fall. So.
Mm.
I'm not sure.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
I The other thing to consider is like, are those people sort of front line, sort of in the store, you know, earlier in their careers, because that's something else that we're seeing, right? And we don't collect that data specifically, but another issue right now is that younger women that are earlier in their careers, highly educated, are having a lot of difficulty finding jobs, right? And so if we're seeing the pipeline uh, go down, then why aren't companies actually hiring more women that are highly educated? Um, and so that's actually something that we may look at the Prosperity Project, because you can't sustain the changes that we've seen at the C-suite and board level. Like, I think there has been good progress made there in terms of increasing the representation of women. You simply can't sustain that if you don't have a pipeline of women going up that ladder. So,
Yeah.
um,
You have to kind of keep filling the funnel at the top to get it.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
It would be interesting also to overlay the data of the Prosperity Project with other data points around burnout, around, I can't help but wonder if the decline in that pipeline is because, we're in this squeeze generation, as you called it, and people making life decisions around, like, is leadership worth it? Or am I content and happy and feeling fulfilled in the role that I have now, which is wonderful. Like, not everybody is going to aspire to be a CEO, right? And everybody's professional journey is going to be different. I think what we're trying to do at Access certainly is to ensure that there are opportunities and supports and encouragement regardless of what your professional aspiration is, that there is a trajectory for you and that it's achievable and attainable. I can't help but wonder, though, if people kind of question whether leadership is worth it.
Absolutely. We actually have data about that. It is from 2023, so we should probably update it. But 73% of women had actively considered leaving their careers in 2023 because of burnout. Like, imagine if that was imagine if 73% of women were just like, I'm done, I'm out of here. Like, our economy would suffer greatly. And so that's a really good point, right? Like, not having blanket policies, not having blanket like return to the office, and really, I think having an individualized approach to what employees need is going to be key as we try to sustain this economic growth.
Yeah, I think people are sort of redefining what success looks like to them. And we're seeing these leaders just hustle and work day in and day out. And it's not as attractive a proposition as it used to be. So, yeah, I'm not surprised the number was that high, actually. I know a lot of people who have either pivoted or thought about it, right? Thought about doing something completely different.
I know. I mean, even at TPP, we've started thinking about succession planning just because we've not done it. And so I'm talking to the team and everyone's like, "No, I'm not interested. You work way too much." And I'm like,
What's your job, Julie?
"You work way too much. You're way too stressed." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's true."
I think there is something to be said for that. Like you are as a leader, you are always on. Whether it's on your phone or you're working in different time zones, there is or the blurred line between home and work, particularly if you're virtual or hybrid, there is no off. And the expectation is that you're always available and accessible. Maybe this conversation is more about how as organizations do you carve out boundaries because there are none.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I mean, personally, it's something that I need to work on, I know. Um, but it's difficult, as you said. There's like, if you work from home, your office is home. At what point is it that you're done for the day, right? And at the same time, that's where the flexibility piece comes in. Like, I love that I could, in the middle of the day, go grocery shopping when no one's there. But it does mean that I have to work a little bit at night. And that's fine. But then is that setting a precedent that I'm available in the evening because I'm answering emails at 7 p.m., for example? So yeah, it's such a huge conversation.
And my question is it on us to create our boundaries or should the organization be there to support us? And like, I also work at night and sometimes I just burn through things because I'm so productive and I enjoy it. I enjoy working in sort of the late hours, but that's my choice versus, like, is it on us to create our boundaries or just select when our best work hours are?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I think as women, unfortunately, though, we've not been taught to put boundaries, right? Our from the time we're little girls, it's like, you need to take care of this. And like, yeah, it's just drilled into us that we are caregivers, that we need to support people. Yeah.
I know we're here in Alberta and there's a strong likelihood that our teachers throughout the province are going to go on strike in the next as of Monday. And so there is an interesting data and actually maybe we should do this with Access is also saying like even with a dual income family, whose responsibility is it to ensure that childcare is taken care of or that you are the first in line for I have to either work from home. I feel like there's probably a gender disparity there.
I wonder if it's linked to income, though, because is it the woman because the woman makes less money and therefore it makes more sense for her to take time off? And that in itself says something too, right? Because okay, why is it that women across the board are making less money than their partners who are men?
Julie, thank you so much for joining us today on The Quiet Part Out Loud. It's always awesome to connect with you and hear about the great work of the Prosperity Project. And we are so looking forward to continuing to develop this awesome partnership between Access and TPP.
Thank you so much for having me. Agreed. Let's keep working together and trying to include more women in positions of leadership.
And thank you to all of our audience. Please subscribe to The Quiet Part Out Loud. And as always, keep saying the quiet part out loud.
The Quiet Part Out Loud is produced by Access Connects and brought to you by... Oh, wait, is there a sponsorship opportunity there? Learn more at accessconnects.com.